The festival of stars should have been beautiful. The citadel's crystalline spires caught the light of 3 moons, casting rainbow refractions across the Seraphine's storm clouds below. Princess Seraphyne stood at her window, watching celebrations she couldn't join, feeling the weight of protocol like chains made of ceremony. Behind her, her personal guards maintained their vigil, Corvath and Selene, warriors she'd known since childhood. Trusted, loyal. The first explosion shattered more than windows. Seraphyne spun toward the sound as alarms shrieked through the palace. Corvath's weapon rose smoothly, aimed not at threats but at her heart. His face held no emotion, just cold duty to a cause she hadn't known existed. "Forgive me, Highness. The Empire ends tonight." She ran. Years of royal dignity vanished in raw survival instinct, diving through her chamber's servant entrance as plasma fire scorched the air where she'd stood. The hidden passages, her governess had shown them to her as a child, whispered games of secret routes and forgotten doors, became lifelines as she fled deeper into the citadel's guts. Behind her, methodical footsteps echoed. They knew she'd run here. They'd planned for everything. The palace shook with violence, loyal forces clashing with revolutionaries in corridors built for pageantry. Seraphine's lungs burned, her ornamental robes catching on maintenance fixtures. She was royalty, not a warrior. Every survival instinct was theoretical, useless against trained killers who'd once sworn to die for her. She burst into the engineering sublevel's main power station, desperate and out of options. Nathan Cross looked up from a control panel, tool in hand, completely oblivious to the chaos. He took in her appearance, disheveled princess, sounds of weapons fire, and said with remarkable calm, "So, bad day." Nathan's brain did what it always did under pressure. Assessed the problem, cataloged resources, started solving. Violent coup, compromised security, one terrified alien princess. Okay, he could work with this. Control room now. It's reinforced against reactor malfunctions, which means it's reinforced against idiots with guns. He pulled Seraphyne into the engineering command center, already running calculations. The space was designed to withstand catastrophic failures, walls embedded with radiation shielding and blast-resistant alloys. Not perfect, but defensible. While Seraphyne tried explaining political complexities between gasps, Nathan was welding door reinforcements. "I'm an engineer, not a soldier," he said, his hands steady despite adrenaline screaming through his veins. "But I'm really good at making things other people can't break." He transformed the control room methodically. Electrified access panels, rerouted coolant systems to create pressure barriers, welded emergency bulkheads into primary defenses. When Seraphine's hunters arrived expecting easy prey, they found doors that wouldn't breach without bringing down the entire power grid. Nathan monitored their attempts through security feeds, adjusting defenses like he was debugging code rather than fighting for their lives. "If we survive this," he commented, rerouting power to overload an access panel someone was cutting through, "I'm definitely billing overtime. Hazard pay too. Maybe a bonus for creative problem-solving under duress." Despite everything, Seraphyne laughed, sharp, slightly hysterical but genuine. This human was treating assassination attempts like engineering challenges, and somehow that made it survivable. Between attacks, Nathan asked questions. About Mevari politics, the grievances fueling revolution, why people wanted her dead specifically. Not to judge, just to understand. Seraphyne found herself explaining things she'd never articulated. The Empire's inequality, the military caste's frustrations, her father's refusal to modernize. She saw her world through his eyes, practical and unbiased. "Sounds like your people needed change," Nathan observed, reinforcing a weakening seal. "Shame they chose murder over conversation. Really inefficient problem-solving method." His matter-of-fact compassion steadied her more than any royal platitude. He didn't see her as sacred symbol or legitimate target, just a person in trouble he could help. The siege stretched into hour 12. Revolutionary forces controlled most of the citadel, but Nathan's fortress held. He used the power grid itself as a weapon, creating feedback loops that disabled equipment, sealing sections remotely, even triggering false reactor warnings that forced evacuations. Seraphyne watched him work with growing wonder. He was terrified, she could see it in the tension of his shoulders, but he acted anyway. "You know," she said during a brief lull, "you could have hidden. Let them have me. Saved yourself." Nathan didn't look up from his console. "Yeah, but then I'd feel bad. I'm really terrible at living with regret. Much easier to just do the right thing and avoid the whole emotional crisis later." When revolutionaries finally breached outer defenses, Nathan did something insane. He opened a communication channel and started negotiating. "Hey, so, engineer here, neutral third party. Can we talk about this like adults, instead of playing apocalyptic laser tag?" The audacity was so startling that the revolutionary commander, a former officer named Kale, actually responded. Nathan laid it out simply. Killing Seraphyne wouldn't solve grievances. Martyring royalty created more problems. And maybe a princess who'd spent 14 hours in an engineering bay had gained perspective worth hearing. Seraphyne found her voice, addressing her would-be killers with raw honesty. The empire had failed. Change was necessary. She'd rather die trying to reform than live perpetuating injustice. The most unscripted thing she'd ever said publicly, and it mattered. Kale agreed to temporary ceasefire. Loyalist forces arrived simultaneously, creating tense standoff, but Nathan had already contacted Terran diplomats. Neutral mediators were inbound. The coup didn't end cleanly, violence rarely does, but massacre was averted. Weeks of negotiations followed. Seraphyne worked with revolutionaries and loyalists both, dismantling absolute monarchy in favor of constitutional reform. Nathan stayed as advisor, his engineering perspective oddly applicable to rebuilding political systems. During one late-night planning session, exhausted and surrounded by draft proposals, Seraphyne asked why he'd risked everything. Nathan shrugged. "Because you needed help and I could help. Engineers solve problems. You were a problem I could solve. That's the least romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." He grinned, the expression transforming his tired face. "I'm an engineer, not a poet. Want me to recalculate load-bearing capacities instead? I can make infrastructure sound really sexy if I try." But his eyes were warm, and she understood. For Nathan, choosing to help was its own declaration, simpler and more profound than flowery speeches. The Reformed Council convened months later. Seraphyne addressed them as Princess Regent, not absolute monarch, her power constrained by law and accountability. Nathan stood in the back, unnoticed by most, exactly how he preferred. The empire hadn't fallen, it had transformed, guided by a princess who learned that strength meant admitting weakness, and a human who proved courage doesn't require weapons. Just willingness to stand between someone and death when walking away would be easier. Across Terran space, the story spread. The engineer who defended an alien princess with welding torches and stubborn humanity, reminding the galaxy that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who simply refuse to abandon someone in need. And in the rebuilt citadel, a small plaque marked the engineering control room.